It's 17th century England, and your adventurers are traveling through a quiet country village overlooked by a church on a hill. A strange door is set in the side of another nearby hill, plainly seen by all who pass. And adventurers being adventurers, investigation is certain to follow. Probably, which will set into motion events that will place the player characters squarely in the path of the monstrous remains of a revered saint. At least that's the premise of The God That Crawls, an adventure for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. And I'll share my review right after this. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. All throughout the month of March, I have been featuring reviews of old school Renaissance releases, and we're going to wrap up with my review of The God That Crawls from Lamentations of the Flame Princess. This is written by James Raggy IV. I think I've pronounced his last name correctly, with artwork and map design by Jason Rainville and Devin Knight. The 57-page PDF can be had over at DriveThruRPG for $7.25. I have to be honest, I'm not sure if this is physically available any longer. I did pop over to the US store for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. I did not get any results from the search, but we are going to be taking a look at the physical adventure here. Just wanted to point that out. Having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got The God That Crawls. A few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, this is not a review copy that was sent by Lamentations of the Flame Princess. This was actually sent to me by a friend of the outlet. They have actually sent some other items in the past as well. They always like to stay anonymous, but they know who they are, so I'm sending a big thank you their way. We're also not going to be looking at each and every page of the adventure, but I do want to give you a good feel for what you're going to find inside. Then lastly, this is an adventure. Now, granted, this came out nearly 15 years ago, but I will stay away from major spoilers. There are going to be some spoilers ahead, but keep in mind, I'm just letting you know. So if you're a player, there are spoilers ahead. All right, first thing we're going to do is take a peek at the credits page. And we will start off with some author's notes, giving us some information about the approach to this adventure. This adventure is supposed to be like a relentless hunt where the player characters are the hunted, while this monster is the hunter. This is designed for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. And if you're not overly familiar with that role-playing game, it is one of the first of the old school Renaissance retro clones to come out. It is a retro clone of basic expert Dungeons and Dragons with a lot of tweaks. And it's one of the better put together early OSR core books. I have reviewed the core book. It is years and years ago that I did so. But if you're kind of curious about what I thought about it, by all means, check out that review. In fact, funny enough, this is only the second Lamentations of the Flame Princess release I've had an opportunity to review. Kind of funny because I think the core book reviews from 8, 9, maybe even 10 years ago. Gotta tell you. All right, so we get the setup. So something about Lamentations of the Flame Princess, if you're not familiar, this is set in a fictional Europe, about 15th to 17th century. And this is supposed to be taking place right at the beginning of the 17th century. It also takes place in England. So your adventurers are traveling across the countryside when they pass through this village, and they see that there's a country church that overlooks the village from a hill. And then on another hill, there's a strange doorway set into the side of the hill. Now they might want to go investigate that and check that out. Once they do, they are noticed by not only the villagers, but the priest of the church, and they are marked because the priest and the villagers are all there to protect what are the remains of St. Augustine, which is actually a monster. So the death of St. Augustine, as history has recorded it, is not true. The saint was abducted, he was tortured, he was poisoned, he was drugged, he was buried alive, and he's been transformed into this mindless, just blob monster who occupies this dungeon area below the church. So the church has been there for a few hundred years, but this dungeon area is probably like 1,000 years old. So pretty wild. I thought that is pretty cool. The premise is interesting. We get some information about the priest in the church and the villagers. Something to keep in mind is the villagers and the priest think they're doing right. They think they're doing God's will. And they're actually remorseful that they have to send our player characters to their doom in the pit. Now, of course, if you are running The God That Crawls with a group of experienced OSR players, they may not be too keen to be exploring things. So there are a few different hooks to get them into the pit. Now, the monster itself, as I pointed out, is kind of a blob. It'll just relentlessly chase the player characters. It has no intelligence. It doesn't even have animal cunning. And what it'll do is it will feed on whatever it catches. And if it is an adventurer, a hero, a leveled character, once it absorbs that adventurer, it's going to become more powerful. If it absorbs a magic item, it becomes more powerful. If it absorbs a cleric, it actually becomes a little less powerful. But still, kind of interesting. Although I will point out, in my opinion, I think the monster is really the weakest point of this adventure because it really doesn't do anything. It just chases after the player characters. And it's supposed to be kind of like this relentless creature. I kind of envision it as being something along the lines of the shark in Jaws. It's just an eating machine, just a killing machine. And in reality, it's just more like the blob, just oozing its way around the different levels of the dungeon area. I would personally kind of beef it up a little bit. Now, of course, it's not easy to get away from, even if it's feeding on somebody. Any other characters who are trying to escape, maybe by jumping over it, it can shoot out pseudopods to grab them and stuff like that. But still, it's just kind of a chase that's going on. Like I said, the way it's written and the way it's presented, it feels like it's supposed to be just kind of like pulse pounding action. I don't think it plays out that way. I think it's probably a lot slower than that. And the other thing too is this dungeon is filled with a lot of cool stuff, a lot of really interesting areas, a lot of temptations for the player characters. So the greedier the player characters are, the more I think in trouble they'll be by the time they reach maybe near the end of the adventure. But also keep in mind, the more things that the player characters encounter and interact with, the more opportunities they have to actually collect some fairly powerful items. I should also point out, I know there are folks out there who see Lamentations of the Flame Princess and right away they're thinking, oh, it's some really gross out, edgy sort of role-playing adventure, because there are plenty of those out there for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. This really doesn't fall into that sort of category. There are a couple of things that people might find objectionable. Granted, the whole St. Augustine thing where he's been change it into a monstrous blob might offend some people, but for the most part, this is played pretty straight. I think the thing I like the best about this adventure are the various different set pieces and the different areas for the player characters to push their luck. There are some cool items here. There are some pretty powerful items, which some game masters out there might be bothered by because this is supposed to be for lower level characters. And all of a sudden, they've got some pretty powerful items that they find. Come on, it's the OSR. Most of the time, the players, not necessarily player characters, but the players aren't ready for the consequences of the magic items and the special items that they're using. That is something I thought is pretty cool, where this is truly that OSR vibe where it's kind of like, hey, this thing does this really cool thing, but then it does this not so cool thing too. Love that. Always appreciate that with the old school Renaissance. I think our major item here is the book, which is really wild. It's pretty bizarre, and it's actually broken up into pieces because if it's combined into one book, it has the power to essentially rewrite reality. Like I said, some pretty powerful items that are to be found here. All right, so that's a peek inside the adventure. Like I said, there's a lot of things I dig a whole lot about this. I also have some fairly major problems with this as well. One being the maps. Let me go back. So that's the map of the church. And as you can see with this grayscale, it's just not all that clear. Now, why this isn't presented as a landscape is beyond me, but it's not the easiest to make out as you're reading it and as you're running the adventure. Same thing with the dungeon level maps. So here's an example here. Now, there are areas that are supposed to be blue and red. I don't know. How are you supposed to tell blue or red here? It's grayscale. Thankfully, we do have a key, so it does show us these little indicators here. But once again, this map is just way too small, even for the paper that it's on. Why isn't this bigger? I don't know. So that works against the game master. Something else to mention, this is not the sort of old school Renaissance adventure that you see nowadays, which are written for, say, like Shadow Dark or old school Essentials, where it's a lot of bullet points, very easy to run at the game table, where it's kind of giving you right away, okay, this is what the players are seeing, experiencing, this is what's there, so on and so forth. The game master is going to have to read this in its entirety, which I have absolutely no problem with, but they're going to have to study this just from the presentation alone. And this is very well written, but it is not going to be as useful at the game table as we see modern OSR releases. Doesn't that sound kind of weird for me to say that? Modern old school Renaissance. And I don't mean new SR, I still mean OSR. But all in all, this is a really interesting adventure. I would just try to pump that monster up a bit, maybe come up with some set pieces where the player characters encounter the monster doing something, as opposed to just being this blob that just keeps rolling along, leaving this slime trail all across the various different levels of the dungeon. So just mentioning that. All right. So that is a discussion of the God that crawls. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. As I pointed out, you mentioned Lamentations of the Flame Princess to certain gamers. Their eyes start to glaze over, or maybe they get a look of terror, because there are supposedly a lot of adventures which are just kind of edgy and gross out and seem to be written just to set people off. Well, thankfully, The God That Crawls is not that sort of adventure. Now, I'm not saying that you won't find anything objectionable within the adventure. It's very possible There are a few things that some people may not care for, but as far as this being some sort of like an edgelord adventure, it certainly is not. There are a lot of things I like about this tale, and then there are a lot of things I don't like. Mainly presentation is the biggest issue I've got. The maps are awful. The way the grayscale is laid out, not easy to make out the maps. They're too small. They should have been a lot larger. Now, keep in mind, this is a first printing that I'm sharing a review of. Some of these things may have been fixed in later printings, maybe in later PDFs. I don't know. I don't have access to a PDF. I only have access to this copy of the first printing. Also should point out, this is not going to be an easy adventure for a game master to run. Even an experienced game master may find some trouble presenting this at the table because you need to read through the entire adventure, which, as I pointed out, I'm completely fine with. I do that all the time. But you're essentially going to have to study this. And just because we don't have bullet points or that modern sort of OSR presentation, yeah, I know that sounds so weird, modern OSR, with the bullet points and the quick reference, you have to read through everything. And this is well written. Don't get me wrong. This is an entertaining read, but it is going to be fairly tough to pull off at the game table. I also think that the adventure reads differently than how it'll play out. Sort of reads like it's going to be some fast moving, pulse pounding excitement where this monster is chasing the adventurers wherever they go. It's a relentless killing machine. The reality is, I think it'll be far slower moving than that. Now, I do like the fact that the more greedy the players and their player characters are, the more likely disaster will befall them. I think that's kind of cool. I also like the various different set pieces with some of the old school styled shiny red button. Do we push it? We know something bad's going to happen, but we get something good. There's a lot of nice risk and reward and some really interesting, powerful items to be found in the dungeon levels too. So this is one of those kind of adventures where it's like, oh, I really like this. And it's countered by something that I'm like, no, I don't really care for that. But still, I do recommend The God That Crawls, just not very highly. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give The God That Crawls for Lamentations of the Flame Princess a 6.5 out of 10. Your mileage is certainly going to vary. Like I said, I would probably cherry pick a lot of things out of this adventure to use elsewhere at my game table. All right, that is it for this time out. If you enjoy the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites, such as DriveThruRPG, and to do so, simply visit thegaminggang.com, click on one of our ads. If you happen to make a purchase, I get 5% of that sale. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal and become a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find links in the show notes. Also in those show notes, you're going to find an invite link to our Discord server. It's absolutely free to sign up, so be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. If you like the video, by all means, give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, which airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Do want to mention I am currently on a break, so no live shows the first week of April. All right, thank you very kindly for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.